Welcome to a new season of Rouge Radio. On our first show of 2013, Frank Stanisci and Matthew Scianitti of TSN discuss the Canadian Football League season that begins with exhibition games this week. Then Frank and Kevin discuss the 2013 CIS off-season news and the upcoming season. Rouge Radio. Show 1 kicks off. Hut hut! Now.
Big night tonight. Very big night. Great company.
Last night, they played the Canadian version of the Super Bowl. It was the 100th Grey Cup in Toronto. The homestanding Toronto Argonauts against the Calgary Stampeders. The late great Roger Doucette, first quarter, Toronto's rookie raider Chad Owens, MVP of the CFL from Hawaii, 5-yard touchdown, aloha. Second quarter, Kevin Gunn picked up by Pacino Horn. He's going to Godfather, 25 yards for a 14-3 Argo lead. The crowd going nuts. Halftime, they had it all. 74-year-old troubadour Gordon Lightfoot to fellow Canadian Justin Bieber, 18-year-old heartthrob. Half a century difference. The Mounties bring the cup out. Celebration at Toronto. They beat Calgary 35-22 in the 100th Grey Cup, or the Coupe Grey. The Argonauts are unlikely chance. They were 9-9 in the regular season. But if you're looking for a bottle of Molson's or a bottle of Labatt's in Toronto, better hurry up.
All right, tonight's a big night. I'm really pleased and proud to say that we're actually gonna set aside my amateur style, and we're going to bring on some pros here. We're going to bring on some guys from who've worked with Rouge Radio, with TSN, who work with TSN. In fact, my new friend, my new best buddy, Matthew Scianitti, and Kevin Garbuio will be on for the second half of the show, which will be the second hour. That will be when we talk college and, amateur football. Remember, this is all about football. You heard me, football. Not that European football. That's soccer. This is football. Matt, it's Frank. How you doing, buddy?
Not too bad, Frank. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thrilled to have you on the show, first of all. I want to thank you for taking the time. Hey, my pleasure, my man. All right, so from time to time, when you have time, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. It's always nice to have somebody who spends a lot of time following the CFL. Let's first do an introduction of you. You used to write at the Post, and now you're at TSN. Fill out the blanks for us. You're a young man with a future, and I'm sure. How long have you been on the show?
On SportsCenter?
No, here on this show. How long have you been on this show?
Oh, I did my first little bit with Rouge Radio back, 2000 and just before the Western Final in 2011. So, this would be the third season I'd be doing Rouge Radio.
Good for you, buddy. And how long have you been on my show here, this one, on Candid Frank Live?
Oh, I think this is the first time.
Yeah, and it's been a couple of minutes, right?
Yeah.
And you've already outgrown the show.
Oh, there you go,
Yeah, hey, listen, buddy, you got to have a sense of humor with me because...
Absolutely.
Okay, bud. And it is going to be an exciting year, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I mean, listen, when you get into the CFL season, what you find, at least I do from a lot of people, is this kind of tacit, maybe dismissal of the league. Again, when you constantly compare it to the NFL in a very, very narrow scope, I think that's kind of unfair. People just have to understand that the CFL is its own little beast, and it's unique in so many different ways, and that's what makes it so endearing. And when you're getting to training camp, and especially when you're getting to Canada Day, Canada Day at Iverwin is no longer, because it's now just a big pile of wrought iron, and they're clearing it out of the way for what will be a sparkling new stadium. But the Canada Day at Ivor Wynne, I remember last year was something special, because when you're getting into the first phase of the CFL season around Canada Day, it's pretty exciting, and then when you get into the nitty gritty of it after Labor Day, that's when it really takes on a different form. So it's a different game, it's a different identity, and that's what I think makes the CFL so unique and so special. And if you can appreciate it for what it is, it really gives the summer an extra little bit of excitement around here.
It sure does. And the most important thing that one can say about the CFL is, but using your term, its own beast. I don't see why people have to compare. Do people compare high school football, college football, the NFL to each other? They don't.
No, I mean,
they're each their own thing, right?
Exactly. And the argument that it's really a non-starter for me when the point is always made that, well, these players couldn't make it in the NFL, or even, which I find more annoying, the Arena Football League, and then they use the CFL as their last resort. Listen, there have been NFL players, ex-NFL players, who have tried to come up here. Dominic Rhodes, who won a Super Bowl with the Indianapolis Colts back in 2007, the latest example of an NFL player who's coming up here trying to adapt to the Canadian game, and it's not easy. If anything, we've had more successful players, most notable of all, Warren Moon, cut their teeth in the CFL. Jeff Garcia is another quarterback who did that. Philip Hunt is a defensive end with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who's now successful with the Philadelphia Eagles, who actually develop up here and go down to the NFL. So it's a totally different league. It requires a different skill set. It requires a different player. Just because you play in the NFL doesn't automatically make you, or would make you, a CFL superstar. So it's, again, if you look at it within its own terms and within its 3-down concept, it is a very unique and an amazing game with really its own little nuances.
Absolutely. The Argos had Michael Williams in camp, first-round draft choice, played Seattle, and he was, and I know you probably noticed just like I did, it seemed like he was only there for 2 days, and he was gone. He was within 2 days.
Yeah, I think you got that right. I mean, I remember standing beside another member of the media and watching him struggle to get off of the line, and even after the first day of rookie camp, kind of hobbling back to the line a bit. He has had leg injuries throughout his career, and even had to, I'm sure many of your listeners will remember, had to take 2 years off of football before he had that impressive year with the Seahawks about 2 or 3 years ago now. And I remember asking him, if he knew about the waggle, which of course is the movement off the line, which a wide receiver can do in the CFL, and he kind of was like, yeah, I'm still learning it, and he didn't understand. Of course, it's always the cliche that there's 12 players up here. So, listen, again, that's a great point. A guy who was great in college with USC, had a pretty good season when the Seahawks won the NFC West, and overall, though, he just, frankly, didn't have the overall, I wouldn't say willingness, but just, he was just another example of a guy who comes up here and can't, it's not because of his size, not because of lack of ability, but just doesn't fit because he doesn't have maybe the adaptability, perhaps is the best word to use, that some other guys, Avon Coburn, who was a guy who didn't succeed in the NFL, came up and won 2 Grey Cups with the Montreal Alouettes as a running back. So it depends on, again, that adaptability, whether they can understand the 3-down concept and the yard off the ball and all the little nuances. It's so far more complicated than people give it credit for.
Absolutely. Okay, let's begin with our tour of the CFL. Excuse me. Let's start in BC. G. Roy Simon's gone to Saskatchewan. Will Andrew Harris, become an MOP candidate or not?
I think that's the most important question on the Lions offense. A lot of people look at Travis Lulay being the an MOP winner himself a couple of years ago, and say that however he goes, BC's offense goes. Andrew Harris had a record-breaking season last year, most yards by a Canadian ever from scrimmage, and I really think, although some people might disagree with me, that his production last year, I think, really signaled to Wally Buono that G. Roy Simon, despite being the CFL's all-time leading receiver, was a bit expendable. So I think Harris coming in now, he apparently has, and this is a guy I've spoken to him on a few occasions, who's all about football, who even says, and a lot of people kind of roll their eyes, saying it, well, why can't I be a Canadian superstar who makes his living in the CFL? I mean, we always look at a CFL player as someone who, although can make okay money, has to find some subsistence at other points in the year, and this guy has completely embraced football. He is a product of the CJFL. And has become, at least out in BC, a really recognizable character. And I think, although John Cornish has a fantastic year, Andrew Harris could have easily won the most outstanding Canadian. And he provides you so many, he gives your offense and offensive coordinator Jacques Chapdelaine so many different iterations with that offense, so many ways to really overwhelm defenses. And it's not just him. If he's not getting the ball, if it's not being handed off to him or thrown to him out of the flat or checked down to him, you've got Sean Gore, Nick Moore, a plethora of young receivers, Marco Iannuzzi. This BC Lions team can flow from Andrew Harris, and if he's not there, and even if he is being a distraction, it opens up so many other options for Travis Lulay. So I think this is a great opportunity for Andrew Harris to, again, go above and beyond what he set last year. Remember, at the beginning of the season, those your listeners who are from BC will remember, this was a guy who, at the beginning of the year, I should say, said, why can't I be a 1,000-yard rusher and 1,000-yard receiver? And I'm not going to go ahead and say that he can this year, but because those are pretty lofty expectations. But we've seen how Chad Owens in Toronto can be a dual threat. Here's a guy 3 straight years, 3,000 yards combined as a returner and receiver. I think Andrew Harris can be that dangerous as a rusher and receiver in BC.
Yeah, they have an embarrassment of riches in BC. And for those that, recent memory football fans with the CFL, the Alouettes made the opposite decision that BC made. They kept some experienced veterans and let go a kid named Chad Owens who came to Toronto and became what you just described.
No, absolutely. And it was a situation, and Jim Pop kind of alluded to it last year when Chad Owens was really making his mark and really trailblazing a path to the MOP award. And Jim Pop said, listen, if it had all worked out, we would have kept him, but we just had, at that time, remember, Mark Trustman had just arrived and they were building a team that would go on to get to the Grey Cup 3 straight years, and that was a big deal. And I think they just made a decision. You look at the Alouettes now, they don't have a returner. Yeah, sure, they have S.J. Green and Jamel Richardson, but what would a Chad Owens, who has, a lot of people should be aware of this, has actually changed receiving positions in the last couple of years, moved from being a slot back out wide to a wide receiver, and that's really helped him out. So it's going to be interesting to see, just jumping to the Argos for a second, to see how, whether or not they give him that much work this year, because the Argos themselves have a plethora of talent in their receiving core. But at the end of the day, jumping back to Harris, there has been a tremendous amount of faith shown to him by Coach Chapdelaine and by Coach Benavides, because they know what his commitment level is, and that really has fed to the entire offense, which, you look at all those offensive pieces and including the quarterback, that is comparatively a very young offense, and one that is still developing. Had a great year last year, fell short in the West Final, but you just look at Andrew Harris and you have to think, TSN, we were all asked to put out our top 50 players. I make no bones about it, I have Andrew Harris as a second, in second place in my top 50, just after Chad Owens, because I really think those combo backs, the receiver and the runner, that combination, that kind of dual threat from one player really makes a difference in the CFL offense.
Catch and run, that's what Jim Barker wants. Let's move on to Edmonton. Well, first, wait, with BC, they dodged a bullet this winter. They could have lost Chapdelaine, and a young offense like BC could have been hurt badly by that.
Yeah, no, they could have. There's always questions. Given, I mean, this is even something about Mike Benavides a couple of years ago when he was the defensive coordinator. BC has so many good Canadian coaches, and that's being linked to a CIS or another CFL team. I think really is a constant thing out there, and it's. I think that Chapdelaine, just like Chris Jones out here in Toronto, will get his chance to be a head coach in the CFL or if not a CIS program. Chapdelaine, not Jones, obviously, he wants to be a head coach in the CFL. But both those guys are two examples of top assistants, top coordinators who really, those two guys particularly aren't just isolated in the particular sides of the ball that they focus on. They're multifaceted. They make decisions, or they are really leaned upon to make decisions by the head coach and the assistant general manager. And Chapdelaine, really, you have to give him so much credit for the way that Travis Lulay has developed. Everyone forgets Travis Lulay had a pretty poor start to the year, just as all the Lions did back in 2011. And it was really kind of Chapdelaine's faith that really helped Lulay develop. So you're absolutely right. The fact that they were able to keep him brings that continuity, and that's so important. And you just look at the Lions and you have to think, yet again, this is a team, maybe besides the Calgary Stampeders, that sets themselves apart as one of the top teams in the West.
After the Grey Cup this past year, when the Argos won the 100th Grey Cup of course, in Toronto at the Rogers Centre, immediately after the game, Calgary was given the nod for being the favorite this year. Has anything changed over the off season?
No, I'm still one of those people who looked at Drew Tate's injury in the West semifinal and was kind of shocked that his brain was located in his forearm when suddenly a head injury became a fractured forearm. You either believe that he played with concussion or that he threw that deep bomb to Robbie Bryant with a broken arm. But I just look at Drew Tate and not just him, but Kevin Glenn, and look at every other position on that team, and I just see the depth. Remember, even though Scott Milanovich, I should say, won the Coach of the Year award, at the end of the day, John Hufnagel, he rotated in close to 70 players last year. He had to deal with so many injuries, and he really, not that I think he should have won, because Milanovich was a first-year head coach and he did wonders with the Argos, but Hufnagel, it should have been really close, because Hufnagel did a hell of a job putting together what really was what a patchwork team together. And you look now, everybody's relatively healthy. If Drew Tate goes down, you have Kevin Glenn, you have John Cornish. It's on that offense. Maurice Price had a fantastic end to the year and really helped them out into the playoffs. And going into their defense, it just really, to me, with Keon Raymond in particular, it just seems to me that they have a team that I think can be more consistent than they were last year. They struggled a bit coming into Labor Day, before they ran those two games against the Eskimos and had a pretty impressive run after that. Again, because Hufnagel had to juggle so many pieces. But at the end of the day, they just have the depth. They have, again, another year into the offense. And if Drew Tate does have a fantastic year, again, it's a cliche, but quarterbacks are everything in the CFL. And if he has a fantastic year and becomes the quarterback that they want him to be, he really can set that Calgary offense apart, and the only team that can challenge him, I think, in the West is BC. So, and if Drew Tate's not there, Kevin Glenn is more than capable of taking that team over. So, depth, experience, really, I don't think you can ask much more out of the Calgary Stampeders.
I guess this is my dark horse, Saskatchewan. Can it happen 3 years in a row? The Grey Cup home team winning the Grey Cup.
Well, it's a funny thing that has happened over the last couple of seasons. Look back to 2011, as I had mentioned previously, the BC Lions had struggled in the beginning part of the year. They were 1-6 before they had that amazing turnaround all the way to the Grey Cup. And I think, although I could be wrong on the record here, I think they were 11-1 going to the Grey Cup. And I was there for their only loss when they lost to Hamilton at Ivor Wynne and were completely blown away, but then came back and at home to secure a spot in the West Final before they were going to, if they had won that, would host the Grey Cup when they destroyed Anthony Calvillo and the Montreal Alouettes. And it just seemed that they were a bit inspired. Last year was kind of funny with the Argos because they weren't very good at home. If anything, they were a much better road team. And then all of a sudden in the playoffs, when they did have a home game against the Edmonton Eskimos, which a lot of us in the Toronto media thought could be a bit of a banana peel, they played exceptionally well. And then in the Grey Cup, they came out. I remember I picked Calgary, and I was reminded of that by everyone in the winning locker room after that. But I came out and watched the warm-ups and saw just the Argos completely, even in what was a very, very, very loud Rogers Centre, one of the loudest nights I've ever heard it, in a packed arena, what the Argos don't experience at all ever if it's not a Grey Cup. And even then, if it is a Grey Cup, there's always been questions about if Toronto can embrace the big game. It did last year, and it just completely propelled the Argos. It just was one of those magical events. And when you think about Magic and the CFL, you have to think about Saskatchewan. I mean, that city lives and breathes and dies on Canadian football. And Brandon Tatum, the general manager of the Rough Riders, has done everything he can, everything possible to put together a very veteran lineup. You look, they've acquired, a couple, you think about it. John Chick has come back on defensive end. Across from him is Ricky Foley, who was the outstanding Canadian for the Argos in the Grey Cup last year. You look, they brought Dwight Anderson, who was a nemesis of Saskatchewan, particularly Western Dressler, for a while. He's a veteran DB who's now in their secondary. They bring in G. Roy Simon. Yeah, he's 37 years old, but he's still one of the best slot backs in this league. You look throughout the lineup, Darian Durant, even though new offensive coordinator George Cortez says he is still developing, is clearly one of the better mobile quarterbacks in this league. He's got Weston Dressler. Corey Sheets, despite his recent revelations about some of his legal issues, is a very, very experienced tailback coming from the NFL, going back to our previous point. All throughout this team, there is experience. They're built to win now. My only question is, if it doesn't work, what kind of options does Corey Chamberlain have behind Darian Durant, who, whether or not, Rider fans like to admit it, has been very inconsistent at times. There really isn't much depth behind him. Weston Dressler, who I believe is dealing with some nagging injuries, if he goes down with an injury, you're going to be relying a lot on, again, a 37-year-old G. Roy Simon, who was injured last year, and if not him, then you're looking at receivers like Taj Smith. Is he ready to take the load? I mean, it's all about depth. We go from a team like the Stampeders that has the depth in every position to the Rough Riders, who may not have the depth, or as much depth, I should say, in every position. So, to me, I think this team on paper, it looks good. Corey Chamberlain says, hey, we look good on paper, and that bodes well, but when the bullets start flying, we have to perform. And if these pieces, A, don't perform, or B, get injured, that's when I start to get a little worried about the Rough Riders. And that fan base in Regina is going to, after seeing what both the Argos and the Lions did the last 2 years, is not going to expect an appearance in the Grey Cup. They're going to demand it.
Absolutely, they are. Okay, we're going to take a short break, about 3.5 minutes, folks. An interview with Matt Black, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the Eastern Division teams in the CFL, and here's Matt Black talking about being responsible, more responsible now that JY's gone.
Receiver, Quincy Hurst.
So, last time we talked, it was the first day of camp, and here we are now, third day of camp, and how do you feel?
I feel good. I got my legs under me. Haven't been too gassed after the first few days, and it's just really starting to come. The offense is getting around my head.
Yeah, I noticed the field here. How do you define this field? How does it compare with the Rogers Center?
I mean, it's pretty similar. The grass turf. This one's obviously a lot hotter because the sun's beating on it all day, so it's kind of tough on the feet. But it's good. It's easy on the joints.
Now, the conditioning that you have, do you feel you're ready to go? I know you're feeling physically well.
Yeah. Well, Coach Milanovic does a real good job with these training camp practices of getting us in shape. We're never walking around. We're always sprinting from drill to drill. And if you don't have anything to do, you got to find work on the side.
Okay, where are you at in your training regimen? Where do you see your improvement in your play in the rest of the training camp?
Physically, I feel all right. Just got to keep my legs under me, keep taking care of myself. And it's mostly all mental. So I'm doing a lot less thinking out there and just playing football now compared to last year.
Best of luck with stuff. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Good.
I'm with Matt Black. Everybody's talking about Jordan Younger going and a guy named Matt Black taking over. Are you ready to handle it?
Yeah, I'm excited about the opportunity that I have in front of me. I'm going to work hard every day, just like I always have. And, I got to earn the trust and respect of the guys that play around me. And, not only the players, but the coaches as well. They have to know that I can fill that void that JY left. And, it's still training camp. Nothing's set in stone yet. It's not week one. So I have to work like, I'm a rookie just trying to make the team. And I got to bust my tail and lead these guys and have them believe in me and the coaches too. And, I think if I do that, when the dust settles, I'll be where I want to be.
When did you learn of, in other words, how long have you known that you might be considered an important cog in the team's defense? When did you learn that? At the ring ceremony, or did you find out at practice the following time?
I learned at the meeting when Coach told the team that he was going to retire. So, I prepare every year like I'm going to have an opportunity to start, and I leave it up to the coaches when I try to make it a hard decision for them. So I prepared all off season like I was going to be, competing for the starting free safety job, and when I found out, it was just business as usual, right? It's just work time now.
Matt, you've done a lot of different things for the team, a lot of positions. Do you see yourself now maybe settling into one position or less moving around?
Yeah, I kind of with our defense, we still move around. Like, we play a lot of man coverage, so you have to be able to play all the positions. If guys go down, I might have to move to another position. So I did that last year. So I think one of the biggest things, too, about being a football player is versatility, right? And they say the more you can do, the longer you can play. And that's really what I try to craft my game around. It's not only just knowing free safety, but knowing the whole defense and helping guys out with that. And if I need to go somewhere else, then, I'll step up and do what I can to help this team win.
Good. Congratulations.
Appreciate it.
That was Matt Black with a little interruption from Quincy Hurst. Regardless, anyway, the Eastern Division now. If you want to add something to Matt Black and Quincy Hurst, Matt.
Well, I was just thinking. I was just listening to Quincy, and I wrote on him for TSN.ca a couple of weeks ago, and I have a lot of respect for Quincy. He spent most of last year walking the sidelines, watching a lot of the Argos go through their paces in a new offense, and he really couldn't join in. And this is a kid who, coming from the University of Manitoba, who the Argos think really, really highly of, and they spent a whole year and just let him rehabilitate, and he got into the practice roster towards the end of the year. But this is a kid who put the work in even when he couldn't work, and I really hope, and I've seen haven't been out to practices a little bit. I was covering a few other assignments, but when I was there about a week and a half ago, he looked tremendous. Had some great catches. And Matt Black, listen, here's a guy who's been a great special teams piece for the Argos for a while. Switched in and out last year when there were admittedly some issues in that secondary, when there were some injuries, and when former defensive back coach Orlando Steinhauer was having some issues with the personnel. Matt Black came in and was always a usable piece. So it's going to be. I think you're right in talking to him about it. There's going to be a lot expected of him, and I think this year the Argos, as much as Scott Milanovic and Chris Jones are extolling their ability to go out and find talent, that could be their weakness this year, and they have a lot of work ahead of them. But Mac Black is the kind of guy who can step up and be a leader because he knows what it takes to play in this league and what it takes to come in suddenly and perform. So I expect a lot out of him in the Argos secondary this season.
This is the year of the stadia, and by that I mean it seems like there's new stadiums everywhere. Now, granted, Hamilton won't get theirs till next year. Saskatchewan's playing in theirs now. Winnipeg's was supposed to be ready last year. Edmonton's redone the seating arrangement, if you will. BC was upgraded a couple of years ago. And then a little further back, you've got the Montreal Alouettes that began this thought process that has inched its way into the Argo psyche, which is, finding an outdoor stadium somewhere that you can play that has adequate seating as opposed to too much seating, and get rid of that mausoleum empty cavern. Yeah.
And they're even expanding in Montreal, which is kind of funny, given that whole premise before. So that's which is funny. But when you're absolutely right in saying that. I mean, my goodness, Investors Group Field, despite all of the journalists at Winnipeg who will apparently have to be doing their work in an outdoor press box, is so bewildering, because anyone who's been to Winnipeg knows that if you're trying to do any kind of work that's not, even if it is construction work outside, you really don't want to be doing it in open air. So I don't know why or who had the bright idea of putting an outdoor press box for those poor people, but it looks like a wonderful stadium. What a wonderful thing. I mean, not 15 years ago we were talking about the overall viability of the CFL and if it could survive going into the new millennium, and here we are talking about renewed infrastructure, and you have Mark Cohan gushing not just about the stadiums that are being built in the existing teams, but a brand new stadium being built in Ottawa, where forever and ever people always question whether or not it could sustain a successful CFL team. So what a difference 15 years can make, and how much people can embrace this league, despite all the people who still doubt its overall importance in the Canadian sports climate.
Now, the team itself, Winnipeg, will be playing in a spanking new stadium. They've got an old quarterback that apparently has really shown up. He's lost a lot of weight. He's fit. He's trim. And hopefully maybe has his injury woes behind him.
Well, that's what you hope. I mean, Blue Bombers offensive coordinator Gary Crowton has said that he has now completely refurbished his offensive package to make it so that there's more protection for Buck Pierce. I don't know why he wouldn't have done that last year, given everybody knew that Buck had issues with contact before, so I have no idea why that would have been done last year to save him all the grief that he and the Bombers had in 2012. But having said all that, I mean, you look at beyond Buck Pierce, who the Bombers have Justin Goltz after jettisoning both Alex Brink and Joey Elliott. I am lukewarm on the Bombers simply because this team wasn't necessarily Buck's fault last season because he was injured, but also completely because this team just did not have any maturity at all. I mean, we were talking about the Swaggerville defense and their bit of impudence that they showed in 2011 and how that aided them. But when they got to the big game, I mean, Odell Willis, who really was the quote mayor of Swaggerville, had a god awful game. There have been debates across the league. I know that not so much in Winnipeg, but across the league about the legitimacy of Jonathan Heffney and Javon Johnson being considered top defensive backs in the CFL. They have a lot to prove this year, and head coach Tim Burke, no longer the interim, came out at the beginning of camp and said, hey, if we got to cut somebody, we'll cut somebody. Now, he's kind of receded a bit from those comments, but there's a lot to be expected out of him. And defensive coordinator Casey Crean, who Hamilton Tiger Cat fans will remember was a rookie coordinator in the league's worst defense last year. So although there is talent across this Bombers lineup. I mean, Chris Matthews, the enormous receiver who won Rookie of the Year last year. Terrence Edwards is coming back off of some injuries. Chris Garrett will be challenging Chad Simpson, or is challenging Chad Simpson for the starting tailback job. Bryant Turner is still can be a very, very, very good defensive tackle. Kenny Maynard could be a great defensive end now that Jason Vega has gone down to the New England Patriots. I mean, all the pieces seem to be there. I just question the maturity, especially now that you hear, we talk about the legal issues that Corey Sheets had. Jonathan Hefney didn't even think it was important to go to his team and let them know that he had been charged with marijuana possession in the offseason. I mean, there has to be some transparency here, and you can't be forcing your head coach who really was hung out to dry. Let's be honest, there was a Fire Joe Mack campaign. I mean, the general manager in Winnipeg has been really ridiculed ever since the 2011 Grey Cup. So all the pieces there, a lot of soul searching has to go on, a lot of hugging or high fives or something, because if they don't get some kind of continuity, some kind of stability there within that locker room that flows out of that locker room, all this season is going to amount to Winnipeg is just a brand spanking new stadium with a very, very disappointing team.
It's funny, it's ironic really, a rebuilt stadium that was a year delayed, a quarterback that was rebuilt a year delayed, and the team itself, management and otherwise, can't afford another delayed appearance, if you will, in the positive side of things. So Winnipeg is really not in great shape, but you never know with the CFL.
No, absolutely not. And that's a great way to put it. I mean, everything just seems like it's not happening at the pace, or hasn't been happening at the pace it should have. And, people have to remember, this is the team in an 8-team league. Who would have thought that there would be a team whose fans would be waiting 23 years for a Grey Cup? Remember, the Blue Bombers haven't won a Grey Cup since 1990, when they were coming off the tail end of what was a pretty impressive dynasty. The Blue Bombers were the team of the mid to late 80s. So you really feel disappointed for it. I speak to Blue Bomber fans every so often, and they keep a tremendous amount of faith in the cold and the wind there in the prairies, and hopefully for them and Tim Burke, and especially General Manager Joe Mack, that they kind of come together this year and figure something out, because, again, the talent is there. The body might be willing there. I just don't think they're, at this point anyway, their heads are in it.
All right, so now we come up with Hamilton, the Jekyll and Hyde of the CFL. If a team makes the playoffs by virtue of one side of the ball, this team would have won the Grey Cup with offense, but their defense dragged them down to the opposite end of the spectrum.
Oh, and Henry Burris would have won the MOP, or would have been challenged anyways by teammate Chris Williams. I mean, I think if there's any team that kind of challenged the premise that the CFL is solely an offensive league, where if your quarterback plays well and your receivers play well and you have a strong running game, you should be able to push on to the playoffs and maybe make if not a push for the Grey Cup, at least get yourself into a division final. I think Hamilton really debunks that, because Henry Burris had the best year of his career at 37 years old. And honestly, watching that defense, despite the efforts of middle linebacker Ray Williams, who is another veteran piece that went to Saskatchewan in the offseason, despite all that, George Cortez, unfortunately for him, couldn't measure up as a head coach. I just don't think I just spoke about Casey Crean, now with Winnipeg, formerly with Hamilton. I don't think Cortez and his defensive coordinator Casey Crean and his coaching staff really were able to get their message across to Hamilton last year. Not for a lack of trying. I was in the locker room at several points last season, and I saw how hard Cortez was trying to get through to his players. Maybe his message just wasn't working. Maybe they just saw a coach who, I won't say overwhelmed, because as someone who has never coached in professional football at all, it would probably be incredibly unfair for me to say, but when you don't know how to use a challenge flag, it might raise some warning signs for your players.
Might raise some
well, I was trying to avoid the bit of a double pun there, but absolutely. It was worrisome to watch them last year, and I remember speaking to Drew Edwards and Steve Milton of the Hamilton Spectator, and they couldn't believe that a team with an offense. Remember, Andy Fantuz has had his concussion problems last year, yes, but inside the red zone, he was still very efficient. This is a team that had Chris Williams, Bakari Grant, Sam Jaguar, young receivers, powerful receivers, deep threats, and they had that running back, Siobhan Walker, who seemed to do, at least for the first couple weeks of the season, every time he touched the ball, he had 12 guys on the opposite side chasing him all over the field. It just went, as soon as they went on to the defense, besides, I have to say, the only time, if Hamilton had played Montreal for 18 weeks, they would have won the Grey Cup, hands down, because they blew the Alouettes out of the water. But every time they faced a team that wasn't from Quebec, they just seemed to fold completely, and nothing was more embarrassing. And they were going to have to live this down for a while. And I know Ken Austin, the new head coach, is a man who is hammering the fundamentals away. But when you are beaten thoroughly by a fourth-string quarterback at the most critical point of your season, when you have to defend a lead, and you're watching Zach Collaros of the Argos just methodically march down the field, literally from inside the Argos' own 20-yard line to set up a game-winning field goal. I mean, that in itself just encapsulated everything that went wrong with Hamilton's season. But they did. Team president Scott Mitchell, who I've spoken to on a few occasions, is not a man who suffers fools or mistakes lightly. He went out, convinced Ken Austin to come in to be the general manager and the head coach, pulled him away from Cornell, brought Orlando Steinhauer, the former defensive back coach for the Argos, who really was so influential in putting that Argo defensive back unit with a lot of rookies, CFL rookies, I should say, besides Jordan Younger, helped them become very formidable. Those two guys are going to be so essential to the Ticats, taking a step away from the very, very horrible 2012, and they have done it very slowly. All the reports out of Hamilton are illustrating a team that's about fundamentals, that's about openness, that's about communication, that's about a bit of levity. Watching George Cortez's his training camp last year was a bit painful at times because these guys are being run into the ground. And they're saying now, Ryan Hines, a veteran non-import defensive back, is saying of Orlando Steinhauer and head coach Ken Austin, saying, these guys are treating us with respect, perhaps maybe not as much as we were receiving last year, and that's great for the morale. And what you have to do after such a horrible, paradoxical season like the Ticats had last year, what you have to do is build the morale within the locker room, and I really think Ken Austin and Orlando Steinhauer are doing that day to day.
Absolutely, and the Argos are going to miss Orlando Steinhauer, but still, in the CFL, we've talked a little bit about coaching. We've talked about the failure of Cortez, and there have been coaches here who, Toronto's had their share of coaches that have come in with ideas, grand ideas that just didn't fit the CFL. It's funny. It's almost like a different language. And when you think that Cortez only traveled up to QEW, you would think he would have had a better idea, about the CFL than it appeared he had when it was all said and done.
Yeah, no, it's the thing about George Cortez is that I think he was a man who was so self-assured. This is a guy who had won a few Grey Cups in a variety. He wasn't just an offensive coordinator. This guy had been part of Grey Cup winning teams as a positional coach on both sides of the ball. So I'm sure he had a ton of confidence. He clearly had proved to team president Scott Mitchell and former GM Bob Lebilovich, now retired GM Bob Lebilovich, I should say, that he could do it. And I believed it. Full disclosure, my pick to win the Grey Cup last year was Hamilton. And they, after
watching John Cornish after the bye week come back, and after so many people had questioned him and whether or not he could be a starting running back in the league, and he came out and he destroyed Hamilton's defense for over 200 yards rushing and didn't even look like he was breaking a sweat, and went on to win the most outstanding Canadian with that dominant performance as his base. It just showed to me that no matter what Cortez tried to do, and he's a very learned man, he's a very philosophical man, he's a man who tried to really stimulate his players psychologically. When he couldn't do that, it just showed me that not only did I get it wrong, but so many people got it wrong, and really the Ticats brass got it wrong, and really relying on Cortez. At the end of the day, it takes something really special to be a head coach, and George Cortez just didn't have it.
Well, does Dan Hawkins have it in Montreal?
Well, that's the big question. I spoke to Coach Hawkins last week when I was in Sherbrooke. A lot of energy. I mean, I wrote about this also for TSN's website. I mean, the guy was running up and down the field. If he could pull his 80-odd players behind him, he would have. I mean, he just a ton of energy. Jim Popp, the general manager, has gone to unconventional lengths to bring in guys that you might not consider for CFL jobs, and he did it with Mark Trestman, and Mark Trestman went on to be very much a Marv Levy type, an American coach coming into Canada and just immediately excelling in the CFL because he got it. He understood, as we spoke about off the top, that it is a different league, a different identity, and you need a different approach. At the end of the day, though, those who are trying to compare Dan Hawkins with Mark Trestman, you can't. Mark Trestman had established himself as a very well-respected offensive coordinator and offensive positional coach in the NFL, had groomed great quarterbacks or helped great quarterbacks like Bernie Kosar and Rich Gannon really adapt as quarterbacks and still succeed later in their careers. Dan Hawkins went to Boise State about 10 years ago and helped develop that program into maybe not, maybe he didn't take it to the heights when they won the Fiesta Bowl a few years ago, but he really helped bring that program into the upper echelons of NCAA football. It wasn't as successful at Colorado State, but his head coaching record professionally can't be denied, and it's 0-0-0. This guy's coming in. He's learning on the fly. He doesn't think that there's much difference between coaching in college and coaching professionally. He's going to learn pretty quickly that there is. Even someone like myself, as I've already said, has not coached professionally. You can see after what George Cortez went through last year, even positional coaches who have won championships in the pros, when they make that transition to the head coaching ranks, it is a different world altogether, and you have to think about so many variables. But Hawkins has the enthusiasm. He's not a stupid guy. This guy is has an incredible football mind. He sees all the details. He was able to, through the course of practice, I was watching, go to almost every single positional coach and every player in almost every position and give them a tidbit and talk to them about improvements, just subtle improvements they were making, and the players were receptive, and that's the key. With a guy who's trying to gain respect in a locker room because he doesn't have the resume that a Mark Trestman has, to come in and establish himself immediately and earn the respect immediately of his players is invaluable. The fact is, though, that Eastern Division isn't one that Montreal owns anymore. Hamilton will be looking to rebound, as we've already discussed. Winnipeg, despite their mental lapses, could be a threat. And the Toronto Argonauts, under Scott Milanovich, got better and better towards the end of the season and won the Grey Cup. It's not a foregone conclusion anymore that Montreal will dominate in the East, and Dan Hawkins has to be aware of that.
Yeah, this could also be the year where a Western team won't cross over. I think it's going to be tough for Edmonton to cross over this year, mainly because they'll be playing BC Calgary and Saskatchewan too often.
No, it's a great point. I mean, when you got to face those three teams, I mean, and you don't know who your quarterback's going to be yet. Yeah, no, there could be a few problems.
All right, let's move on to the team that I follow, and that would be the Toronto Argonauts. The big question is, can they repeat, and will the coaching changes that they've gone through survive, the test?
Well, I have to say that the guy who is under the most scrutiny this year for the Argonauts has to be new defensive back coach Eddie Brown. I don't know the kind of coach he is yet. We knew who Orlando Steinhauer was when he coached those defensive backs. But we're going to see how he is going to manage those defensive backs, how much faith Chris Jones is going to put in him and all those new pieces. Now with Jordan Younger gone. Last year, the big question was those defensive backs and all the new pieces throughout Toronto's defense heading into their Grey Cup winning year. That defense was seen as their weakest link. I still think that's the case, not only because they have lost all of those key pieces, and particularly above all else Jordan Younger, but also Ahmad Carroll, who also retired, because they just don't have the same recognized face as their coach. Now, if you watch, and you've seen it already, Frank, if you watch on Argos practice, Chris Jones runs that pretty thoroughly. So he is going to keep all his coaches honest, but it's really going to be incumbent upon Coach Brown to take everything by the scruff of the neck, to take his new players. Hopefully they get Patrick Watkins back. They'll have Pacino Horn apparently, but Jalil Carter at this point is the Grey Cup veteran, the only starting piece in that Grey Cup secondary. It's going to be interesting to see how Coach Brown deals with the vacancies and the incoming bodies and the few pieces that remain. But throughout this Argos lineup, there's one thing that Scott Milanovich, when I spoke to him the first couple of days, and General Manager Jim Barker said, it's stability and its consistency and its cohesion. This team, they believe, has moved from strength to strength and can be better coming off of their Grey Cup winning year. Offensively, you can't deny that. There were so many issues with that offensive line. A couple of, the experiment last year was if they were going to play 5 Canadians to maybe get around some ratio issues. They ended up putting Tony Washington at left tackle, the big American, and he had a fine season. But you look through that up to Ricky Ray, he's going to be good. Ricky, he took some time to develop last year, but crucially, you go back to that Saskatchewan game towards the end of the year where the Argos were in Regina. Ricky had a great game, and he just was fantastic all the way down the stretch. Chad Cackert, what can you say about a guy who didn't have the starting job the year before, hadn't really had much experience as a starter before then, came in and was not just the rusher that the Argos needed, but the pass blocker that they needed. And the receivers, although there had been, so much was put on Chad Owens, but when they needed guys to step up, Jason Barnes, who was released earlier in the season, came back, had a strong finish, and a guy I think could have a tremendous year this year. Dontrell Inman, the guy has fantastic hands. He's put on some weight, he's put on some size, and the whispers that I'm hearing around the league is, and I tend to agree with them, is that this guy could potentially be a divisional all-star this year, could most certainly be a 1,000-yard receiver. And then you bring in a piece like Romby Bryant, of that great and still mesmerizing, given the injury, pass from Drew Tate to Bryant last year in the Western semifinal. And then, of course, there's apparently the fastest receiver that General Manager Jim Barker has ever seen, John Childs, who is in Argos camp as well, who's impressing. So all the pieces seem to be there for a repeat. The thing is, in the CFL, everything is unpredictable. Anything can happen. We could be talking about the Argos having a god-awful year coming into week 4. My goodness, even though they started Trevor Harris in tonight's preseason game against Winnipeg, would they do the same if Ricky Ray went down? Would they be desperate to bring in? Because remember, Kevin Glenn might be looking for a team. Would they want to trade for Kevin Glenn if Ricky Ray went down? I know these things sound absurd, but in the CFL, it's just hour to hour it can change. So yes, the Argos look very good for a run, at least to repeat as division finalists. But again, my goodness, they could be having a horrible year come the middle of August. But, right now, head coach Scott Milanovic, and apparently he said this after the Grey Cup, my reliable sources do suggest that he wasn't very celebratory after the Grey Cup because, as one person said, he looked at a bunch of friends and said, just wait until we're good. So if that's the kind of confidence the coach has, given his head coach of the year season in his rookie season as a head coach, how could you deny the Argos' chances?
Well, there obviously is a team chemistry there, and by that I mean the GM and the coach, the head coach. They really are on the same page. And Jim Barker is not a guy who plays around. If he's not happy with you, you're gone. Yep. He doesn't fool around. Yep.
No, it's a fantastic point. I mean, I didn't mean to sorry for cutting you off, but that's
okay.
That's exactly the point. I mean, Jim Barker has said time and again, I do not in these words explicitly, but I do not suffer fools. And tonight the Argos pull off the 24-6 win against the Blue Bombers, and without a lot of their key offensive pieces, and even a defensive piece. I mean, my goodness, we haven't even talked about Khalif Mitchell yet, and what he could do for that Argos defensive line, but he wasn't even playing tonight, and the Argos have won. A couple of years ago we were talking about the Argos and really what was a toxic atmosphere in Toronto, and they have really done full credit to Jim Barker. He really has done some really great things by bringing Scott Milanovic on board, Chris Jones on board, and now new offensive coordinator Marcus Brady. Stability in Toronto. My goodness, right now the only thing that the Argos need to, the two things unfortunately the Argos need to worry about is a practice facility and a stadium. Because with what they have on the field right now, there are no issues, and it's been a very, very long time since we've talked about stability and the Toronto Argonauts in the same sentence.
Okay, let's take a short break, and we'll just take a couple of commercial breaks. We'll come back, clean up, and do a little housekeeping on the season. Maybe discuss some issues that we didn't discuss that might be of relevance. You actually touched on the one that I wanted to touch on. When we get back, we'll do that. All right, you're listening to Candid Frank Live, streamed on Rouge Radio, and I'm here with Matthew Scianitti. He is of TSN, and he writes for tsn.ca. If you want to follow him on a regular basis, just go to TSN. Okay, with the last couple of minutes that we've got left, let's do something for the company that you work for, TSN. I've mentioned on this show, before I even knew you, before I even had you on the program, I've always been happy with the job that TSN does, that they've done over the years. They've created this Friday night football package, which is really doing really well. They've now turned the corner, and that being the CFL, that they're no longer just sharing revenue. They're also paying the CFL to show their games. It's been a real good story for TSN and the CFL, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, it's, again, to go back to my point, 15 years ago we're talking about the overall viability of the Canadian Football League, and you have to respect what the CBC did for a long time and being a very proud partner of the CFL. But what TSN has been able to do, and this is, it sounds almost self-serving given that I'm an employee of the company now. But before, just watching it from afar, seeing guys like Glenn Suter, Chris Schultz, Jock Climby, Matt Dunnigan, see the kind of passion they speak with the game, and how they've been able to really affect how Canadians see the CFL, and the results have come in the ratings. You have occasionally, and this is no word of a lie, you have occasionally the CFL, when compared to some hockey games that TSN has during the hockey season, drawing as much, if not just a little bit more, than some NHL games. Not saying it's on par with hockey in this country. Nothing could defeat hockey in this country. But to know that CFL is in the mindset of Canadians, at least to a recognizable point, like hockey is, it's pretty tremendous. Given how we were seeing not near empty stadiums, but a lot of empty seats throughout the league and 10, 15 years ago. So it's a tremendous thing, and the TSN has really worked really closely with the CFL in developing a strong brand. So 101st Grey Cup, strong TV deal, strong TV revenue, new stadiums coming in. Overall, you can only think that the CFL is moving strength to strength and now expanding. We are still talking about not just Ottawa coming in, but possibly a 10th CFL team coming in. We do have Touchdown Atlantic. It is the ongoing market project to see if there can be a viable marketplace, a viable team out in the Atlantic provinces. We oftentimes forget about the market share out there and how many eyeballs, sports fanatics live in a very concentrated area between, what is, 3 or 4 provinces. So a lot of untapped potential still for the CFL, which is obviously tremendous news for not just Mark Cohan, but the executives with TSN.
Coast to coast, for sure. And like you, I was at the Grey Cup game. Now, I bought my ticket. You probably got in for free, Mr. TSN guy. But I paid for my ticket.
I was working for the league then. I was, funny enough, I was working for the league at that point, writing for their website. Oh. But yes, no, I can't deny that I was I did enjoy it from all the festivities from a press box.
That stadium, if it were possible to have at least an 80 or an 85% filled stadium for Argo games, I'm going to call it the Skydome now, the Rogers Centre would be appropriate, would be a great stadium. You referred to earlier that Montreal's expanding, going beyond, I guess, the 30,000 seats that they had prior?
I think they were, it was about 19,000 at McGill, and funny enough, I was actually just in Montreal last week, and I walked up the hill of the McGill campus going on to Mount Royal and just watched or was looking at some of the additions they've made. Very, very slight additions, much like they've done at Commonwealth Stadium, just adding new seats in. But just expanding nonetheless, adding a couple hundred seats, which is still great because that, for a while we were talking about it. It's, a lot of people tried not to make it a comparable situation, but the Olympic Stadium really was cavernous. Was a cavernous pit for the Alouettes for a while. Now it can be a second home during the playoffs, but it really had become a bit of an issue. So, the Ticats on their end have downsized their new stadium just a little bit. It'll just be a smidge over, I think, or just under 25,000. Potential to expand, obviously, for any future Grey Cups. But the Argos, I really think, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, especially if the Blue Jays and the ownership group there, Rogers, decides to, as been long talked about, cement the posts in the outfield and put natural grass in the Rogers Centre and give that now aging. My goodness, we're talking about what was once a revolutionary stadium, now an aging Skydome, or once called the Skydome, now the Rogers Centre. If they're trying to make those posts permanent so they couldn't switch it for football configuration, I still think discussions have to be had about the viability of the BMO Field option, even though a lot of soccer fans in the city will turn their noses up at it, or if there's potential to develop a stadium in the Downsview Park area north of the city, which is still the largest chunk of undeveloped land in Toronto, which is kind of amazing to say given how much development there is in the city. So as much as there is stability and good feelings league round and in the city in terms of the CFL, there's still a lot of issues the Argos have to tackle, and a new stadium and a new practice facility are paramount among them.
It's kind of sad that we ended it on a sad note, Matthew.
Well,
with all the good news we talked about.
Well, you could flip it to say that that there's still things to think about. As Chris Rogers always likes to tell me, at every game there's a smile and a handshake to be had. So I guess if you see it that way, as most gregarious businessmen would want to, you can see as the potential, and that's what you have to say with the CFL. It's if there's one word that's encapsulated the last maybe decade and a half, it has to be potential. And I really think that's what the Argos still have. You know, the most successful team in CFL history still has a lot of potential, and I fully expect them to capitalize on at least hopefully some potential avenues in the future. So sure, it might sound like some gray clouds at the end, but I still think there's a lot of positives to be had.
Well, I think there's a good chance that the cowboy riding the white horse may work its way over the horizon.
Yeah,
it could happen. It's happened before. It'll happen again. I don't think the CFL is that disrespected that Toronto would be stuck without a stadium. I'm sure somebody out there would put some pressure somewhere to make something real happen. That really, that's more reflective of the city and the 9 million people that live in the near vicinity of the team. It boggles my mind. I'll tell you. Well, listen, we've overrun a little bit, and I hope Kevin doesn't get mad at me. Kevin Garbuio is waiting to be on. We're going to be talking amateur football. Matthew Scianitti of TSN and TSN.ca. Thank you, sir. It was a real pleasure, and I hope you'll have time to come on again.
My pleasure, Frank. Thanks for having me, and talk to you soon.
Joining me now is Kevin Garbuio. Did play football at the university level. He's an expert now at CIS football, and a lot of great CFL players coaching around the country, aren't there?
Yes, across the board. Even I'm currently coaching right now in the OFC, the junior OFC, where just varsity, and Jesse Lumsden's father is the Hall of Fame fullback. He's his father's coach. It was coaching the Burlington Stampeders, and they're a perennial powerhouse. And you see players giving back all across the board, and it's nice to see football players from all over giving back, especially CFL players who have all the wealth of wisdom, especially in this country.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about your favorite subject, and that is CIS. Do you want to start in Quebec?
Yeah, we'll start in Quebec. The big news, especially coming out, is we knew last time I was on the show, we were talking about how Laval was given or awarded the Vanier Cup, and it was going to be at TELUS Stade, formerly known as PEP's Stadium. And it just came out recently that TELUS is going to be the big ticket sponsor for the Vanier Cup this year, which is really nice to see, especially being named so early, because usually we haven't had the luxury of seeing a big sponsor, especially of TELUS's size, sponsoring a bowl game, a Vanier Cup game. That's not even linked. It's not being piggybacked by the CFL this year. It's not being piggybacked by the Grey Cup, and that's a huge step forward for the CIS.
They really have developed a bit of independence. In fact, TELUS is also sponsoring, I guess, the Women's Rugby Championship a couple of weeks earlier. So TELUS is in there with CIS, and the CIS, college football has really developed a name on their own. The Vanier Cup is a well understood brand.
Yeah, it is definitely a huge brand. It's a big tournament. It's a big deal, and the playoffs especially have been great football. Not to say last year where everyone was anticipating Calgary and McMaster to be the real Vanier Cup final, and Calgary didn't show up, and then McMaster went on to lose to Laval. But we've had some great games in the past. Off the top of my head, Queens Laval a few years ago was a fantastic matchup. The Vanier Cup 2 years ago, where we went to overtime with Laval marching back to come back down 21 points, eventually losing to McMaster. That was a great game as well, and it's nice to see that it's starting to build its own brand. And the interesting thing is with TELUS sponsoring the Vanier Cup, it's the CIS's recent agreement with Rogers to be shown on all their networks. So I don't know where it falls. I don't think that's been announced yet. It's going to be on the newly announced Sportsnet 360, which the Score is turning into, or if it's going to be on the other platforms, whether it be Sportsnet 1 or all the other local networks.
Well, it is about time because, in fact, Rogers, the excuse they had for having so many channels was that they were going to provide coverage for Canadian sports. And I can't think of a better Canadian sport than Canadian football played at the university level.
I know, Canadian football especially, which is so regional. You have the Quebec, people say that their viewership's through the roof. Like on the SRC, why not tap into the English portion of that? And I don't know the figures exactly, but University Rush on the Score has been fairly successful, and I know they've been having great games on there. Talking to Donovan Bennett whenever he's on this program, you see him. He's been covering great games at the Score now, Sportsnet 360, and out west, they're covered on Shaw, and it'd be nice to see them get a national broadcast. The AUS as well, they're on Eastlink. It'd be nice to see them get. I don't think they've had a national game, seeing two AUS teams pitted against each other nationally. I don't think that's been since probably 2007. Maybe 2007, I think, was actually the last year where Acadia faced St. Mary's, and that was when Eric Glavick was running the show in St. Mary's. So it's been a long time to see that on national. We see the Mitchell Bowl on TSN. I have no idea if it's going to be on. If the Mitchell Bowl is still with TSN, or hopefully it'll move over with Rogers as well. If Rogers is giving all this money and airtime, it'd be nice to see them build the brand, because TSN, for all it's done, they're only there for they're only Mitchell Bowl, and then they're there for, say, the UTEC they're there for the UTEC, the Mitchell, and then the Vanier. You give 2 weeks of coverage, maybe 30 seconds a weekend. In highlights. It's nice to see Rogers say, all right, we're putting the money down, we're putting this down, we're going to build the brand, not just football, we got all the other sports. So
absolutely.
It's going to be nice. The visibility is huge.
Yeah, well, not to give up my age and make you feel very young, but here in the metro area, CHCH Channel 11, the first television station, by the way, in Canada, had their CIAU at the time, they called them, their games, right? And they would show all the different sports that are played at university on Saturday afternoons, I believe. Is it possible that Rogers can create because what I think the successful thing that TSN did with the CFL is they created that Friday night football thing. And it really rings, it rings true. It attracts people. They know on Friday night, there's a doubleheader. I can watch CFL on Friday night. Is there a day that you see in your mind that would be preferable for, university sports?
The Score tried the University Rush in Saturday afternoon, and so many people are doing so many things in the afternoon. In Quebec, it definitely works Saturday afternoon. The ratings are big for them. If you ever go to any games in Quebec, they're all fairly well attended, minus, say, McGill, which is competing with all the other distractions that you can have in Montreal. But I think Saturday afternoon would be okay if they brand it properly. The CFL was on TSN, but it wasn't getting the viewership. They come up with this Friday Night Football. They come up with a jingle, and they put money to it. They presented it. They production, and people said, oh, okay, I'm going to start watching it. If they put the money in, if they built it up, Saturday during the day would be fine. What are you competing on Canadian television on Saturday afternoon? You go to CBC, you see skiing, you see figure skating, and not those sports, but that's what you're competing with. You have American college football, I guess, to a certain extent, but there's Canadian purists, and maybe if they build up on this is Canadian game, this is Canada's game, this is the importance of Canadian football and how it is so Canadian, the essence of it, and there's so many people who Canadian hockey, Canadian this, but then American football. So people like to pick and choose what they're patriotic about, but if they really built up the importance of the CIS and built up the how it's almost a feeder to the CFL now, that might help.
Oh, absolutely, and there does have to be a commitment by television, and if there has to be a commitment by the CRTC, in suggesting that there isn't enough of a commitment, there are my goodness, Toronto, the Metro Toronto area, Southern Ontario, is inundated with hockey games. Every night there's a hockey game. Then even in the afternoons. And I'm not against hockey, don't get me wrong. And, baseball, Rogers Sportsnet. I mean, there's baseball, it almost seems like there's like 18 baseball games on. And I think, it wouldn't hurt the networks and wouldn't hurt their bottom line that much if they gave up a baseball game on a Saturday afternoon to show football instead on a regular basis. And I don't want to sound cold or callous, but they have to show the good teams playing. Unfortunately, that's the reality of television. You have to put your best foot forward, and there's no other way around it. And I think that the quality of football that's played by the better university teams that are committed to football is the way to go. And the better the games that you see, the more interest there will be in coming back. I don't think it's that hard I don't think it's that hard not to crack. I don't think.
Oh, agreed fully. Look at any sport. Look, the Chicago Cubs in baseball, they've been trashed for how long? People want them because their viewership, because they have a fan base. Same with Notre Dame. When Notre Dame is a 500 team, they're still going to bowl games because networks, people will tune in. If you show the Westerns, the Queens, the Lavals of the world, say Laval just for they're the best team, but then you show the teams that have a huge alumni that's powerful and travels and watches their team play. Well, you put them on TV, their fans are going to view. So that makes perfect sense. And trying to put a team, you watch sometimes and they have York, U of T, and not to knock either of those teams, they're both on the upswing. But say 3 years ago, you have York, U of T on TV. It's, all right, well, who does either team have? And you're just putting it out there. If you put up a big game, you put up a Queens Western or any homecoming game where the atmosphere's there, that'll get a huge viewership. What kind of games do you want to watch?
You hit the nail on the head.
Definitely.
All right, it's the atmosphere. It's all about atmosphere and hype. Let's face it, that's what it is today. Today, you got to convince people it's the place to be. And if you're advertising empty stadiums and dull crowds and football teams that I'm not naming names here, okay? That's not what I'm trying to do here. But if the teams suck, so does the viewership. You got no choice. You gotta build up the brand by building up the teams and show. I mean, look what the Americans do in U.S. television when it comes to hockey. They refuse to show Canadian teams. Why is that? Because they believe there's no interest in the Canadian teams, so they show only American teams playing American teams. It's the reality of television today. If you want to sell something, it's got to have a nice package and it's got to have a nice glow. And if it doesn't, don't expect it to sell just because you think it's Canadian. You really have to work at making it look good. And TSN has done a wonderful job of making the CFL look professional. The games are covered beautifully, and the games are good games. That's the importance of, selling television, selling ads. You got to make it look like it's something people want to be a part of.
Well, if you're going to show exactly that, and then the CIS, obviously, there's some teams that struggle. There's teams that are rebuilding or growing, or sometimes have fallen off their way, and they shouldn't be on TV. Obviously, the big teams should be rewarded. I know maybe that doesn't sound right, but you watch.
No, it sounds perfectly right. Game. Yeah. Kevin, don't be apologetic. Don't be apologetic.
Yeah,
the good teams deserve to be shown on the air. Just like Hockey Night in Canada doesn't replace the game on Saturday night with an AHL game. Come on. They put the best teams out there. That's what you have to do. And I don't know if that's a problem in the CIS. Well, whether when they make a deal to show television, whether they feel that they have to be fair and show all the teams, they've got to do what's right for the organization long term. And you've got to put your best foot forward. And you're covering a great sport. I've had good fortune to watch some of the games, the Vanier Cup games. I can't remember a disappointing Vanier Cup game. Can you remember one?
They've been in the past. Recently, when you get an OUA team versus a Quebec team, they've been fairly well. They've been great turnouts. The issue seems to be right now is that it's just trying to knock off Laval. But it's always nice seeing that team beat Laval And that's what, going back to Laval, you go to a Laval game, there's the atmosphere. Even at the game. So you go to different stadiums, different AUS, different Q stadiums, different OUA. I haven't been to any West games yet, unfortunately. I'm hoping to go to some in the fall, but you see it very quiet, or there's not that many people. You go to Laval and people are having fun. They're partying. They're having a tailgate party, and everyone's having a good time. They have a big screen where they have showing people partying, and it's encouraged that tailgate atmosphere.
Well, you're right. Well, why don't we move over? You may not have been in the West, but tell us a little bit about it. So Laval's a big story in Quebec. Out West, what are the big stories out West?
Out West this year, this is the one thing that Jim Mullen was mentioning, is that there might be an expansion out West. In the West Conference, everyone knows about the teams leaving. They've had football teams leaving, like Simon Fraser has left, and they're trying to rebuild it. But the Okanagan Sun, which is in the CJFL of the OFC, not the OFC, the CJFL of the West Division, sorry. They're trying to get a team going at their university. So they're trying to get a bit of an expansion. And the way that they're doing, interestingly enough, is they're going to take their junior team and just have it feed seamlessly into their CIS team, which I think is a fantastic idea, so that you don't have to go through the growing pains. People know the system, and then you have your players just move quickly into it, and then you don't have to really go through the growing pains. But it's really nice to see the West try and grow their game right now, because they've had issues with losing a team. Obviously, Simon Fraser leaving hurts them, and they've had some teams struggle. Alberta's in a bit of rebuilding, but it'd be nice to see that part of the country grow and get more talent and get better, because, as everyone knows, the heart of the CFL is the West. The Western fans are the best ones for football. So if they could build up their CIS portion of it, that would only just feed football in Canada and continue to grow it, especially in the Western portion.
Okay, so the West is in flux, if you will. Now, what about the East? Are we the beast here in the East?
In the OUA is going to be very interesting this year. And I'm just, with the way that conference moves, like right now, the recruiting and all that, it's interesting to see how right now it goes the Q with Laval, and then the OUA is number 2. But it's so different, their philosophies and how they're building, because in Quebec they have the ability to pull from the CEGEP program, so they're getting trained athletes, 20-year-olds come in. While in the OUA it's so big on coaching, and money's being spent on coaching and getting the best 18-year-olds and building them up and building up their potential. And now we have got a team like Carleton coming in that is kind of using the Laval model, where they're getting a lot of money from the private sector and building it up almost privately owned. And they're going to come in with, say, 90 recruits this year. They're starting a new team. They have Coach Steve Samar as their head coach. They're bringing in all these full-time coaches like J.P. Asselin from Ottawa, who was the head coach there, and he took the offensive coordinator job at Carleton. They're bringing in coaches like that. It's really interesting to see how that one's going to go, because they're going to come in, and you talk to people around the CIS, and usually when a team comes in, you're thinking, maybe 5-7 years. People like 3 years watch this team contending for the Yates Cup and the OUA title, and wouldn't surprise me, because they got a quarterback, Jesse Mills, and he might be a heck candidate within 2 years.
Yeah, there are some really talented. I had a chance to talk to Will Finch and his dad, and this kid is phenomenal. Out of high school, goes to Western, starts to learn being a quarterback. Actually, out of high school, he ends up at the Hamilton camp, the CFL Hamilton camp, the Ticats camp. Goes to Western at the beginning of the year, is basically learning his trade, and at the end of the year, towards the end of the year, an injury happens. He takes over and really shows some real talent. And then he comes to the Argo camp this year. This is another amazing wonder kind.
I'm surprised he didn't even go stateside with how great he's done. He was the starting quarterback for Team Canada when they won the World Junior Championships last summer. which was a huge upset against the States. And you see this kid just continue to grow. What was his first? I think his stat line in his first game was like over 200 yards passing, over 100 yards rushing. And what kind of kid does that as an 18-year-old?
Not shy to learn real quick, is he?
And he came through I think Neil Lumsden's program with the Burlington Stampeders.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that team's just putting out talent. So you have him, you have Jesse Mills, you have Austin Kennedy in Windsor this year. So the OUA has strong quarterbacks. In the Q, they have their normal beats. Montreal and Laval are going to be strong. Just looking online, the IF so for the International Football Championship in San Antonio, Team World versus Team USA. There's 4 prospects on the team who weren't on CIS teams, 2 of which are Laval commits. So they get the best of the best. They're pulling the best players out of SAJEF consistently. So they're always going to be a tough out, especially with how great they are. They're the undisputed right now until a team knocks them off. Sherbrooke with Jeremy Rock at their quarterback. He has one of the most impressive arms I've seen. He was only in his second year this year, and he was throwing rockets. So, again, Canadian quarterback position building up. Then the furthest point east, you go to the AUS, and it looks like it might be another down year, unfortunately, in the AUS. And the AUS is near and dear to my heart. I lived in Wolfville for 7 years in Nova Scotia, so I've been following AUS football for a long time, and it hurts to see them right now struggle. But it's going to come back up, but unfortunately they're forced to play against the Q this year again in the UTEC Bowl. So I don't foresee an AUS team making it to the Vanier Cup, and I don't think many people out there will argue with my prediction, even though it's a June prediction.
All right. You know what? I've got an interview here that I want you to hear. It's Kyle Quinlan before the draft talking about his career. And then let's talk about how it has ended up after the interview. Okay?
All right.
Kyle Quinlan, the latest in a line of great Canadian quarterbacks that come out of university and are unable to crack the CFL nut as far as being a Canadian quarterback in the Canadian Football League. The winner of the 2011 Vanier Cup has ended his hopes and dreams by taking up coaching back at his home school, McMaster. But before that happened, and before the draft, this is what he'd hoped.
I think my style of play is balanced. I like to move the chains with my feet as well. I try to spread the field vertically and horizontally. You know, the benefit we have in the CFL is it is a large field, so there's a lot of space, and if you have an athletic quarterback that can kind of take advantage of that.
Again, the bootleg for Quinlan, and what? Can you believe that? Kyle Quinlan takes flight.
Well, you get to touch the ball every single play. You know, I think that's the biggest thing, and being a field general, that's something that I always took pride in. And just having your stamp on every single play, whether you're handling off and finishing the fake and trying to block guys with your eyes and stuff like that.
Inside, sweep now to coaching. Now goes the other way. He's got some room here if he gets the block. What a block by the quarterback.
Kyle Quinlan just scored a knockout.
I think for me, I take pride in being a student of the game, so I'm going to continue to try to get better every single practice and every single game. And I love film study, so to stay in and watch the film and just really critique myself.
So far, the 47th Vanier Cup here in BC Place has been the Kyle Quinlan show.
It was surreal. It still hasn't fully sunk in. I think seeing that trophy every once in a while, it's starting to sink in a bit. And when we get our rings and are able to look down and see that it actually happened, everything, the whole end of that season just kept going on, and it was a great moment. Well, to continue playing the game I love, I just have so much fun playing this game, and I think Canadians should be proud of the CFL. It's a different style of football than the NFL, and it's exciting. More of a wide open passing league. So as a quarterback, it'd be a dream to play in that game. Kyle Quinlan, quarterback, McMaster.
Okay, Kevin, what happened? This is 2011. He wins the Vanier Cup in 2011. We're in 2013, and what happened?
I don't know why he wasn't given the opportunity. You have a Canadian quarterback who has hype. If there ever was a CIS quarterback who was a household name, quotation around household name, it would be Kyle Quinlan. Everyone seemed to know who he was. He was on TSN. He was featured in TSN's greatest CIS game ever. He was a mainstay. His year this year was insane. If he wasn't in trouble for what he did in the year that they won the Vanier Cup, he probably would have won the Heck Crane that year. And if people were paying attention to him the year before, he probably should have won it that year too. He probably should have been a 3-time Heck Crane winner. But you know what? It seemed like they didn't want to give him an opportunity. Jim Mullen, the reporter out of Vancouver, out of BC, he's the head of the top 10 voting for the CIS top 10. He writes a blog, Jim Mullen now.blogspot.ca. He wrote a great article this week actually about how serious were the Alouettes about Quinlan. He goes, we know the answer, and he brought up great points. Quinlan wasn't really communicated with by the Alouettes this offseason. They didn't really talk to him, extend the arm, saying, hey, come in, we'll teach you some things, whatnot. They kind of just said, oh, we got training camp if you want to come. So he kind of saw the writing on the wall. He didn't get a great opportunity to get many reps last year when he did sign. In training camp, he didn't get any reps in a game. They set him on the field to hand off the ball or take a knee. So he doesn't get any game action. And it's frustrating because how long has it been since there was a great Canadian quarterback? About 40 years. Russ Jackson, I think, was the last one. And
Ron Lancaster, Russ Jackson. Jerry Titilio was American, right? Jerry Titilio was American. He played like a Canadian, but he wasn't American. It's been a tough road to hoe for quarterbacks. And, the embarrassment may happen. I think you may have hit the nail on the head a little bit where, a kid like William Finch will go, you know what? I'm going to learn what I can here. Thank you, CFL, for helping me, have me come to camp. But, I don't think you're going to give me the kind of chance I need. And he may go to the U.S. And then, we as Canadians will have to be embarrassed into realizing maybe there's something we should do to make the league more friendly to Canadian quarterbacks. And I'm not trying to... I don't have anything against American quarterbacks at all. It's just it would be nice if, a Canadian quarterback would get the kind of chance that I think they deserve and they don't get. It's just you can't blame the CFL teams. The ratio is the ratio, and the way they apply the ratio is the way they apply it. There would have to be a rule change somebody would have to come up with a rule change that's, that isn't a poison pill to the league. You know what I mean?
There has to be a rule change because there's no incentive right now, and many people have written about that or spoken on it. And it seems that there's some general managers in the league who say, "Yeah, we need this." And think about it. We just had a long conversation about growing the brand of Canadian football. Well, who's the figurehead of every sports or every CFL team or any football team? Who do you know? Who's the household name? The quarterback. So you want to build in how many Canadians do you think if we took a poll and just called around, how many Canadians think Doug Flutie's Canadian?
A lot of people probably.
Everyone, whenever you say who's the last Canadian quarterback, most people would say it's Doug Flutie, forgetting that he might be from Boston and he played at Boston College, but People, he was a Canadian. He played football in Canada. He was a household name. It would build the brand. And, I'm just looking, Liam Mahoney, he was a quarterback for Concordia, switched to receiver because he knew he wasn't going to play quarterback in the CFL. Kyle Graves who was nominated for the Heck Crane as a quarterback. He's from Acadia. He's now in Alouettes camp as a punter. So you get things like that. And some people get opportunities. Eric Tillman gave Mark Mueller an opportunity at the Eskimos. He got to go 3 for 3, Ron Lancaster's grandson. So he got an opportunity at least to show his stuff. But other times we don't really get to see this, and quarterback's not getting that chance. And it would be a shame to lose out on great opportunities. Will Finch is a great athlete. We just talked about how he could run and throw. Don't be surprised if he wants to play CFL, he has to be they move him to receiver.
Absolutely.
That's a shame.
Now, I mean, I'm just, I'm trying to wrap my head around an answer about this. And what comes to mind with me all the time is, okay, what kind of trade-off can we make if they put a quarterback in, let's say, for a quarter, all right? For 1 quarter, put a Canadian quarterback in for 1 quarter, 1 full quarter, and that gives you an extra guy on the ratio table. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, they've got to think outside the box. They've got to motivate teams to use Canadian players, because if you're not invited to camp or given a chance to play, really play, because everything you've told me right now says the player never had a chance to play, never had a chance to do anything. And if you're not given a chance to play, how can you be successful?
Well, if you just give them third-string quarterbacks. As a third-string quarterback, you have to have 1 Canadian quarterback on your roster. So just by doing that, you have to. All right, well, we don't have that many good Canadian quarterbacks created. Well, now you have an incentive, CFL, to give back to the CIS and grassroots and start building up quarterbacks and start working throughout that and building up quarterbacks in Canada. Because you know what? The best athletes don't want to play quarterback in Canada. Why? Because they want to play in the CFL. If you have aspirations of being a CFLer, say when you're in grade 10, well, if you have aspirations, I bet you some people would rather be wide receiver than quarterback. Because you know what? You have, if you want to have any dream of being a CFL, you want to hone your craft at wide receiver. That's what you have to do. And I don't have exact numbers, but there's players who would rather play wide receiver than quarterback because they have dreams of making the CFL. And if you want to be in the CFL, you can't be a Canadian quarterback.
Let me remind you. Let me remind you, you're listening to Candid Frank Live, streamed on Rouge Radio. We have a responsibility to stop disappointing young players who basically are, Canadian quarterbacks have to play football. I mean, you can't have a team without a Canadian quarterback in Canadian football. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it. If you actually think about, can you imagine if the National Hockey League had no Canadian goalies? I mean, there is a bit of a problem with Canadian goalies right now because most of them are European. But can you imagine if there were no Canadian goalies and because there were no Canadian goalies, they weren't going to give one a chance to prove that he could play goal?
Oh yeah, they're having that issue right now. They created that ratio right now in the CHL where that you're not allowed to draft. You have to, if you want to draft a European goalie, I guess you have to draft them in the first round of the import draft.
Right.
It's the new rule. So So imagine that where you're restricting a player. You rarely see Canadian quarterbacks go. Brett Sinopoli was one of the best Canadian quarterbacks in a long time, and he was a third stringer for the Stampeders. He was the holder, and he was a great quarterback. And it's a shame that we don't get to see these people get opportunities, but it needs to be changed. You can't fault the teams, or you can't fault management to a certain extent because they're playing with the hand they're dealt. You don't want to do anything to hurt your team's opportunity of winning. But in another thing, the management's not really putting up that much of a fight to say, hey, let's go with Canadian quarterback, or let's change the ratio so that we can get Canadian quarterbacks. So it's a two-way street. You can we understand why they do it, but I don't understand why they don't change it. Thanks again for having me on. I'm sure we'll be talking a few times this summer and going into the fall.
Absolutely. Hopefully on a regular basis. Kevin, thank you for your insights. Jason Sperling is the producer of Rouge Radio, and thank you, Jason, for helping me put together today's show. Kevin Garbuio and, of course, Matthew Scianitti. I'm Italian. I should be able to say his name. I don't understand that. Thanks again.